Amazon beefing up its workforce in New York City, but the company has announced it'll be adding offices and about 1,500 workers in Manhattan rather than Long Island City, Queens. So that was supposed to be one of the locations for Amazon's second headquarters, if you remember. But Amazon canceled those plans in February after heated local protests. Joining us right now is one of the fiercest opponents of the Long Island City campus and a politician who's been called the Amazon killer in New York State. Senator Michael Gianaris is here, whose district covers Long Island City. Good morning to you. It's great to see you, Senator. I know that there were a number of you taking victory laps of sorts on Monday, or I should say Friday evening, when this news broke, in large part making the argument that said, see, the city didn't need to offer these subsidies. We can debate that point in a moment, but make the argument first.
Well, the argument is that Amazon was coming to New York. They were always coming to New York, and they will continue to come to New York because that's where the talent pool is. That's where their competitors are hiring talented people. Google is adding 20,000 jobs without significant subsidies. Facebook, just almost on the same day as Amazon, announced an acquisition of office space twice as large as Amazon's. So they needed to be here. They always needed to be here. It's many of us believe they knew they were selecting New York before that whole beauty contest process.
This feels like a false victory, though, in many ways, because all the companies that you just talked about, including Amazon, are not locating in your district. They're not locating in Long Island City, which is what this was always about from the very beginning. They're all locating on the island of Manhattan, which seems to have no problem attracting companies without subsidies. The issue, I thought, was always about trying to get a big company to act as an anchor tenant, to build a hub around and create an ecosystem in an area that has not had that kind of attractive opportunity for business before, no?
Which is happening organically anyway. The first building Amazon was set to occupy in Long Island City was full within a matter of weeks of them announcing they were no longer coming. So Long Island City has been growing. Some would say it's growing too quickly, and the affordability of housing is a serious problem that we have yet to deal with adequately. But the point is this, is that worth $3 billion in incentives and subsidies? And I want to address that point because over the last several months, I keep hearing people who just read the top lines and they say, well, it's $3 billion off of the expected revenue, so it's really just getting less than you wanted. You're getting 9 out of $10. It's still worth doing. But most of the expected revenue in this study was coming from taxes on the new jobs. You are still going to get that if they add those jobs anyway. New York City, Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn, Bronx, Staten Island, it's the same tax base. So if they in fact are generating, but let me just say this first, and I will answer your question. If they are generating that same expected revenue, and we are not providing that incentive and that subsidy, we are in fact saving that $3 billion. That is a true statement, and people need to get their heads around that. If they're coming anyway, if those jobs are coming anyway, which I believe they are, then we are in fact saving that money for use on other things, on other public works, on mass transit improvements, on the affordability of housing, et cetera.
What about the issue of the jobs themselves being in Long Island City? Doesn't that matter? Doesn't the goal have to be to create an environment that's hospitable to lots of big businesses, to create that hub? Isn't that what you've always wanted?
And in fact, as I said earlier, that is already happening organically. It's not happening in a splashy way. It's not happening with the big helipad on top of the building. It's not happening with the giant Amazon logo staring at Manhattan across the East River. But it is happening with small and medium-sized businesses, which is exactly the way it should happen. We don't need to subsidize the largest companies in the world in order to make that happen. And what happened Friday shows that. You
know, the thing to me, though, is if you are somebody on your side of the aisle who might be considered liberal or progressive, to me, this is actually an example of the rich getting richer. This is inequality. This is everything that I would think you'd hate. The idea that Manhattan is getting these jobs, not Long Island City. That's the piece of this that seems so backwards to me.
But here's what I don't get about your question.
At the same time, the other piece of it I would say is, if the goal is jobs, and given so many of the other policies, which I believe you support, which I would have imagined add to the debt in the name of jobs, it seems preposterous to me to look a gift horse in the mouth like this. I will accept on face value that it is an affront to so many people, the tax subsidies for corporations and the laundry list of terrible examples where they haven't worked. But I look at this particular deal as one that actually looked like it held the company accountable and actually would have created those jobs. And if it didn't, we wouldn't have been paying for it.
Right, and we obviously disagree about that point because there was $500 million of the $3 billion that was
Correct.
a straight-up cash subsidy.
Yes.
And in fact, they were going to acquire and utilize a very, very valuable piece of land that would have happened whether they created 1 job or 25,000 jobs. People have to remember that there was zero commitment that was binding legally for them to bring any jobs into this project. The MOU that was bantered about, on its first page says there's nothing in this document that's enforceable. It was all just a conceptual statement. And if people want to take that and believe it's true, then they're welcome to do that. But some of us are more interested in the accountability you're talking about. But you keep harping on this difference between Manhattan and Queens as if the 2-mile span of the East River is somehow incredibly impactful. It's less than a half-hour subway ride from one to the other. So when you say Manhattan's adding these jobs, you make it sound like those jobs are only going to Manhattan residents. There'll be plenty of people from Queens who will be working there, I'm sure, as they already are.
The whole point is to build a hub where you have not only employment from Amazon, but then you have restaurants, you have laundromats, you have, and now you could say you don't want gentrification. That's a different argument. I would argue gentrification is progress to some degree, recognizing that there has to be ways to try to solve on the other end so that people can have affordable housing at the same time, which I know is its own conundrum. But the idea that you don't want that kind of progress because of the gentrification, I think also is complicated.
Well, I certainly have a problem with gentrification. That's a huge part of the discussion. But I take issue with your assumption of what's going to happen. I would just say take a look over at Seattle, where small businesses around the Amazon campus have been failing since they got there. These campuses tend to be very insular. They provide a lot of the services in-house, everything from 5-star chefs in their cafeterias to all sorts of services. They're designed to keep people from going out into the surrounding community and supporting the local businesses. I actually traveled to Seattle more than once during this last year to take a look at what's happened there. I talked to people actually who were Amazon employees. I've talked to local government representatives there. I did my homework on this.
But what about... You look at, I mean, look, see, there's lots of issues in Seattle, but if you told me that Amazon wasn't in Seattle, I think we'd have a bigger problem, or Seattle would have a bigger problem, given their own tax base.
Well, you mentioned the word housing in Seattle, which to me is almost laughable. Their rents have gone up 3 times the national average. Their homelessness problem is among the worst in the nation. And it's because of the gentrification you just touched on, which is what big tech brings to these cities.
And if you didn't have those, what would have happened? What's the alternative? That's the piece of this I don't understand.
The alternative is better planned and more moderate growth at a pace that a community can handle and with a community and public plan that is driven not by the desire of Jeff Bezos to make profits, but by the desire of local representatives to keep their communities intact.
Can I just ask you one other question? This commuter idea that somehow, and look, I recognize you could have actually, it may very well be that a lot of people would have commuted to Long Island City and they wouldn't have lived there initially. I think the hope long-term would have had to be that there would have been additional buildings there. I know then you're going to get into a gentrification issue. But I'm going to turn around. Think about the Bronx. Think about Harlem. Same type of subway ride, a half hour. The difference between placing a big business in the middle of Harlem or them taking office space on Park Avenue seems obvious to me. In a perfect world, you'd want that business to be in Harlem, even though they're only 30 minutes away by subway. And the reason is because hopefully it would actually create create more economic viability, create more jobs. It would gentrify parts of the neighborhood.
I'm not quibbling with your premise. Yes, we want job growth and we want jobs, but this was not the plan to make that happen. And this was a horrible idea with a massive subsidy that was unjustified to a company that didn't need it. And we don't need to be paying bribes to Amazon to get them to locate a couple miles down the road from where they're planning to go anyway. And we will have job growth in Long Island City. If you set foot in there and you look up in the sky, there's buildings going up every single day. It's one of the fastest growing parts of New York without Amazon. And so one of the things we have to consider as a community, you say gentrification is progress. I say it's not progress to the people that live there and have to find another place to live or driven out into the streets. And that's not progress for our entire city either, when the homelessness would go up, which it would, as it did in Seattle.